content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
Well, I guess it really wouldn't be appropriate if Mother's Day and Father's Day were to pass and we did not have at least one more arrest of Barry Morphew. This is one of those cases that keeps coming up, and you and I have talked about it at length. And I'm sure people at home are like, why are they still talking about this case?
I don't think so, because things keep legitimate things keep happening.
See, I would say that too. I do not have all of the episode numbers off the top of my head. If you've been here for a while, we have talked about the murder of Suzanne Morphew for a very long time. The first reason we talked about it because it was an interesting case. Husband got arrested, and it kind of got boring to us. Then there was DNA from another party that was found but not really identified. And then the charges against the husband were dropped, and the husband was suing everybody. Well, it's 2025. It's specifically June 2025. And we just found out that Barry Morphew, the husband of Suzanne Morphew, has been arrested again. Denver 7, as a news source out there, they carried an article from Landon Hafe that says Barry Morphew, linked to sedatives, has been detailed in a new indictment accusing him of Suzanne Morphew's murder. This is a really weird article, which is why I chose it. It kind of feels like ChatGPT maybe wrote it. It says Barry Morphew was the only private citizen in the south central Colorado counties where the Suzanne Morphew death investigation unfolded who had access to the specific mix of drugs in her system. This is according to a new indictment that accuses Barry Morphew of his wife's murder. This is an indictment from Friday, June 20th, 2025, filed by a 12th judicial grand jury, and it comes 3 years after the first murder case against him was dismissed, and 21 months after Suzanne's remains were found. And it says that the indictment details cell phone and vehicle telematics data from Barry Morphew's truck that contradicts the story he told law enforcement after his wife went missing, and that it includes outages at key times of the investigation, as well as evidence that Morphew's body was moved to the Salgos County locations where it was found back in 2023. He was taken into custody in Maricopa County, Arizona on Friday, according to the DA's office, which said it would try to have him extradited back to Colorado. His bond was set at $3 million, and once he is back in Colorado, he will be set to stand trial in Alamosa County. The 12th Judicial District Attorney, Ann Kelly, whole new district attorney, by the way, provided few new details in the case, but said she felt it was important to hold the briefing to update the community on the indictment. Cold case homicides are tremendously difficult, she said. They're difficult for the families of the victims and the communities who wait patiently for answers. While it may seem at times the world forgets about these victims, I can assure you that my law enforcement partners in Colorado's law enforcement community do not forget. Every unsolved murder is a tragedy, and we must never give up on our efforts to find answers in these cases. She thanked the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, which sent its resources to the rural 12th Judicial District to aid in this investigation. As prosecutors in Colorado and law enforcement in Colorado, we are very dedicated to making sure that we don't forget the victims of cold case homicides, but we do understand that it's so important to make sure that we've done everything we can to bring a case to court, and we are proud of the work that we've done. That's according to Ann Kelly. Denver 7 says they reached out to Barry Morphew's new attorney, David Beller, who provided the following statement. Yet again, the government allows their predetermined conclusion to lead their search for evidence. Barry maintains his innocence. The case is not changed. The outcome will not either. The summary they give here is pretty good. It says Suzanne Morphew went missing Mother's Day 2020 after leaving for a bike ride, and Barry Morphew was arrested roughly 1 year later on charges of first-degree murder after deliberation, tampering with physical evidence, and an attempt to influence a public servant. In April of 2022, a judge granted a request by the prosecution to dismiss the case. Less than 2 weeks before trial was set to begin in Fremont County. The case was dismissed without prejudice, meaning they could try him again if they wanted to go back through the process. With prejudice means they cannot. Prosecutors said at the time that a ruling by the judge that they could not call their most expert witness at trial due to discovery violations meant Suzanne's body needed to be found in order to prove the case. They said they believed her body was in a hard-to-reach mountainous area that was covered in snow at the time. During an unrelated investigation 17 months later in September 2023, Suzanne's body was found in a shallow grave in a Saguache County field. An autopsy ruled her death was a homicide, and a powerful mix of sedatives, butorphanol, azapirone, azaparone, and medetomidine, or BAM, was found in her system. BAM is commonly used in sedating animals for medical treatment or movement, according to a medical expert cited in Friday's indictment. BAM is only available by veterinarian prescription, according to this indictment. Records show that only Barry Morphew, along with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the National Park Service, had been issued prescriptions for the sedative in the years leading up to Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. Barry Morphew last purchased multiple kits of this chemical compound in Indiana in 2018. Seems like that expands it beyond Colorado. But ultimately, the prescription records show that when Suzanne Morphew disappeared, only one private citizen living in that entire area of the state had access to BAM, and it was Barry Morphew. That's in the indictment. The indictment also details evidence that suggests that Suzanne Morphew's body did not decompose in the shallow grave in Saguache County. A lack of bug activity or animal predation on the remains, and a lack of decomposition in her clothing is cited. Iris Eiton, who was his attorney, has maintained his innocence in the years since he was arrested. When the case was dismissed, Iris said there was no physical evidence linking Barry to Suzanne's death and accused the prosecution of dismissing the case because of their own misconduct. Linda Stanley, who you and I have spoken about in great detail, she was the lead prosecutor in the case, and she was disbarred after state disciplinary authorities accused her of a slew of violations during the case, including making inappropriate comments to the media during the prosecution. Barry Morphew filed a malicious prosecution lawsuit against a host of parties in Chaffee County, including Stanley, in May of 2023. That lawsuit was dismissed, with a federal judge saying that prosecutors acted badly in the case, but authorities still had enough reason to arrest and charge him. So that's the true crime news for today. Not a lot of extra stuff going with that at the moment. Just Barry Morphew has once again been arrested in the ongoing saga of who killed Suzanne Morphew. What do you think about that?
Well, I did want to add something briefly to that, and this is straight out of the probable cause? No, it's straight out of the jury indictment. Okay, if you recall, one of the times we briefly discussed this case, it was with regard to what ended up leading to the sanctions and ultimately the charges being dismissed, right?
Yes.
The DNA, right? And so in the grand jury indictment on page 3 of 10, it says, an expert in DNA analysis testified that law enforcement provided analysts with one of the partial profiles developed from the glove box of Suzanne Morphew's vehicle for further investigation using a keyboard search. This allowed for additional comparison to profiles in more databases with less stringent quality control standards than the National DNA Index system for the limited purpose of creating possible investigative leads. That expert further testified that there were matches to outside databases nationwide. The term match used by DNA analysts does not mean identical. Rather, a match only means that there were other profiles that could not be excluded at the limited number of loci available for the partial profile for comparison. The expert explained that she then compared the matches for those databases to the partial profile for the mixture of on the glove box and excluded those out-of-state profiles as not originating from the same contributor in all but 3 instances. Finally, the expert explained that just because the profiles from the databases matched at the limited loci available for comparison, it did not mean that any of the people from the out-of-state profiles were the same person that contributed the partial profile to the mixture on the glove box. Law enforcement investigated those 3 partial matches obtained from 3 separate out-of-state sources and found no connection to the case. Okay, what is that?
That's a lot of words.
What does that mean to you? Like, just because to me, that is a nothing burger explanation for the DNA, and it's rambling.
What do you mean?
They did not explain the DNA there. It sounds like they tried. What they were saying was, it looks like a match, but we decided it wasn't.
Like, okay, so first of all, everything you said in that word salad they used, to me, sounds like reasonable doubt.
Well, it depends on how it's presented in court, right? Now,
I'm just saying from a defense attorney's perspective.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I'm not saying really one way or the other. The thing that got my attention after Barry Morphew had been arrested was the unexplained DNA, right? And
that was linked in CODIS hits to multiple crime scenes.
Correct. And so basically, if we are to believe the grand jury indictment and what the DNA analyst conveyed to whoever wrote this up, we would have to believe the fact that something hits on CODIS means nothing.
Yeah, okay. I haven't told you about this. I'm working on this case that there's a CODIS hit. There are multiple states between the CODIS hits, okay? Like, so you have an origin sample. I'm working on that. It has a CODIS hit that is 9 years old in a completely different state. So, based on my interactions with you, I call up the cold case unit and I'm like, hey, can you guys, because when you get a CODIS hit and the letter comes back to you, you get a lot of information that means do more work. Does that make sense?
Sure, right.
So I got a name that is an investigator on the case. I got a witness's name, which in this instance is the person that would turn out to be the prosecution's witness. Like the victim is what people, we don't call them victims in the work that I do, but ultimately the prosecution's witness. And she's not a decedent. She's alive. So I call up the person that's on the list. He's like, I'm not in that unit anymore. I'll pass you off to the detectives that are in that unit. Takes a couple days. We exchange some emails back and forth, just kind of talking about what I'm looking for. And the cold case unit gets back to me. And they're like, yeah, we closed that in 2000. I pick a number. It's either 18 or 19. And it was declined to prosecute. So from my perspective, the reason I'm interested in that CODIS match is because at least in one place it's unknown, but they have information that I need and they don't care. So I've had to kind of move beyond the cold case unit and move towards the state's attorney unit, which state's attorney's offices turn over quite a bit in terms of the hierarchy and who works where and who does what.
Right. Because they're appointed, right?
Right. And so sometimes people stay because they're sort of the glue that holds the institution together. So sure. They tend to be like administrators and certain deputy assistants, but state's attorneys tend to bring in their own investigator and their own, like, their chief deputy and stuff like that. Sometimes that's not the case if it's like all within the same sort of network group. Like, you'll have some of the same institutional people. But nobody can tell me why they declined to prosecute. Nobody can find the case file. But there's clearly this CODIS hit, and the police recognize the case. So I am now becoming, not quite there yet, I'm becoming the belief that, like, cold case units as we know it presented in the press is sort of a myth, or at least a rarity in terms of, like, the organization of the knowledge and the information.
Right. Because, like, the match does nothing for you if they don't have the case file.
Right. And, like, so a case file exists here. I've got a witness's name. I can track them down. Like, I don't know what to ask them yet. So, you know, now I'm going back to, like, the people involved in the other case, the Origin case, which took place in 2023. And, like, I'm going through the people there, trying to see, like, who's linked to what area and what other people. But I bring all that up to say that, like, I work for defense attorneys, and I know that's a biased perspective in a lot of ways, but it comes with the unique perspective, at least I'd like to think so, in that we get the person who's accused of the crime and all the information surrounding that, but we also get discovery of what's going to be in court, because, like, court's not for surprises. This has the potential to be a surprise, because my belief is it's either laziness or it's connected to a deceased, like, person's DNA. Does that make sense?
Oh, well, that could be why they didn't prosecute it, I guess.
So I would, like, that would be the way that, like, I looked at this as a prosecutor and wanted to move forward, would be if I figured out who the person was whose DNA was found in the course of the Suzanne Morphew investigation. And after finding that person, I was able to look at it and go, he died before Mother's Day that year. So those old hits don't count.
that would be right. Yeah.
That would be about the only way I would let this slide. You know what I mean?
Right. And you still got the same 3 places matching, right?
Correct.
And it would warrant further information to be kind of, you know, pulled out of that, as far as, like, well, we just decided it wasn't relevant, because that isn't, I would have said, I would have previously said that wasn't going to hold scrutiny. I'm not so sure anymore. I am unsure of what juries are picking up on versus what they're understanding versus whether they care or not. And so because of that, I'm not sure. Now, I don't know if Barry Morphew killed his wife or not. Initially, I thought, statistically speaking, it was likely he did. Then, with the DNA kerfuffle that occurred, I was like, well, that's not going to work in in the prosecution's favor, right? And now I read it several times. I feel like they're dismissing a very important concept of the case, and I feel like they could probably get away with it, honestly, the way that juries are sort of...
Yeah, we're reaching a stage of, like, the criminal justice system where it's sort of like pieces of it are imploding on themselves because of people's exposure to things they think they know.
Right, exactly. And I sort of feel like I thought that was what I wanted. Not that it just didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. But the BAM evidence, it's interesting because I've thought of, like, how crazy that is, but also what I immediately thought to myself was, well, that just means that the BAM syringes or whatever, however it comes, that just means it was in the house, right?
Yeah. I can paint you a scenario right here where if that
Well,
DNA
sure.
is relevant, like I know like how we get here.
Well,
First of
sure.
all, what's in that indictment is BS. I don't believe they tracked down everybody that ever had BAM ever. They like sent an investigator out to do it, and that investigator was probably as lazy as the rest of them, and like gathered some information and like Barry's is from Indiana. They focused on Colorado. I'm sure you could find a state where somebody had some BAM, but it is a weird coincidence.
Well, it is weird, but they're also just looking for. I mean, I guess I don't know anything about this cocktail of drugs. They use it to sedate animals, I guess, and I have no idea if it has any recreational value, if it can be bought on the street. Like, I don't know, right? But it could have just been sitting on his workbench or whatever. I think this has come up before.
I think there's a loaded dart gun, but I'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead.
Well, the interesting thing is, I didn't bring up the old indictment to compare it, but I already saw quite a few differences just from my memory of the first indictment or something that they had. Because they've already switched like what the telematics was showing from his vehicle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that is data. And in theory, it wouldn't switch. Like there wouldn't be anything different, right? From one analysis of it to another.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean, I guess it could have been misinterpreted the first time. I don't know. That lacks explanation, but I'm interested to see what becomes of this. I'm interested to see if a prosecution can, because I feel like I know at least what an average person knows about DNA, possibly a little bit more, maybe not. But when I was reading that, it didn't give an explanation that back when I saw the findings initially, when I was like, that's crazy that they found those, right? It doesn't jive as an explanation that explains it away to me. Now, what would an explanation that explained it away to me be? Well, it wouldn't be that like, while it matched things in CODIS, right? We decided it wasn't relevant. That's a weird thing, right? And if you recall that the matches were something like glove box, bicycle helmet, and bike seat, maybe?
Something like that, yeah.
And it was something where like it wasn't like a manufacturer did it, right? Like it wasn't.
Yeah, I think we went so far. Like I don't remember exactly how we went. So if I get this wrong, I apologize. I think you and I like were looking at it like, could it be the manufacturer? Could it be a service and maintenance person? Like somebody who was doing the oil change and needed to get the registration out of the glove box.
Right, that was the glove box, exactly.
Like we were looking at it from the perspective of like, if this information is accurate, it's kind of weird to have it all tied to these items and be at this crime scene. That's essentially where we were.
Right. And I would say it's I mean, I guess I could find a set of circumstances that would make it work, but it'd just be really weird to have it on her bicycle helmet and her bicycle seat and it all be the same match, which they said, except for 3, they found them not to all match, which was, again, they're not saying anything new there. The whole point of the previous document where I guess it was ruled that the charges be dropped, I think that's what I'm thinking of. It was literally like that there were 3 things that matched, right?
Yeah, it was the motion to dismiss, and there was also like a defense motion that we had pulled from for a previous episode. Yeah.
Right, but here they're saying, well, all of them were excluded but 3. But in the other one, it was like 3 of those matched. And it's a weird play on words that my brain is kind of I was surprised by the arrest, honestly.
Oh, I'm absolutely surprised that he was arrested. I'm also like, in my mind, I can already see this going down as sort of a battle of experts. Like, how do you reconstruct all of this? Particularly when they start talking about telematics and the BAM material. And like,
I feel like that that's going to be so a battle of experts translates to the jury having a preconceived notion and going the way that they want to go. Because honestly, the battle of the experts, it's only intriguing to the people watching at home.
yeah, I guess I'm saying it from the perspective of I think this case has gotten enough publicity in that area that like both sides are kind of known. And like, you're always going to wonder, why did they drop the charges the first time and then they find the body? Maybe that makes up for it. I can easily, like, just as a defense minded person, I can already tell you that this BAM ain't it.
Well, that's basically that was what they tied the records of the BAM being dispensed or sold or whatever, however that process works. The records showing Barry Morphew, whatever the statement was, like that he was the only private citizen to have it, whatever that statement was, and the fact that it showed up in her bones, it showed up in her remains, and I was trying to figure out what they were getting at because they were talking about how her clothes they
didn't decompose. They're basically saying her clothes should have been shredded. There should have been evidence of animal predation, blah, blah, blah.
And so basically, they're saying that somebody put clothes on her. Well,
they're saying the clothing she was wearing when she died did not, like, something didn't jive between the place her remains were found and the place that she was known to last be. Like, they're having trouble with the transportation issues, the decomposition issues. They're saying that there should have been bugs, there should have been animal activity. They're like, they're kind of wandering around in what I would say is a big pile of evidence that seems to be circumstantial stuff that, like, they're trying to, like, make it look like it points to Barry having moved the body.
Okay, and I sort of got that. I just didn't quite get it to jive. But do you recall, like, a very outspoken prosecutor or somebody on this case who gave, like, a very detailed account of Barry basically hunting Suzanne down?
Yeah, and I think that's where my defense theory comes in too. So you go ahead, and then I'll give you mine.
You saw where it completely changed in this indictment.
Yep.
Well, which one is it?
No, I don't know. I don't know, like, what the difference is going to be there. But I can tell you, look, all that BAM is fine. It's just not the silver bullet they think it is. Because if they don't tie up that DNA, if that DNA is still left free range DNA at this trial, and, like, the experts say it does not match Barry, it matches this CODIS head, and we don't know who it is.
Well, they're saying that they do know who it is and that the further investigation has excluded them.
Well, they better be dead.
And that could be, they had to have been dead before the crime.
That's what I mean. Like, they have to be deceased prior to Mother's Day when Suzanne disappears. If they're not, then as a defense attorney, all Barry's lawyers have to do is put the tranquilizer dart gun in Suzanne's hands and have it taken away, which we can't prove or not prove. And then you have a struggle in the house or on the grounds where that other person whose DNA is free floating takes the gun away, shoots Suzanne with it, and then stages the rest of it. It gets a little wonky, but it's reasonable doubt at this point to have that DNA there that's linked to these other CODIS heads.
Well, and it's weird that the way, okay, so if it's going to match in CODIS, right?
Yeah.
So you put they collected the swab and they got a profile and they put the profile in CODIS and it matches things.
Right.
It doesn't make sense without anything but like words, any sort of further explanation that makes any sense. It doesn't make sense to say, well, it matched in CODIS, but it doesn't matter. That's weird.
It is weird.
And I feel like they've overlooked a lot of relevant parts here. And I have no idea if Barry Morphew killed Suzanne or not.
Oh, me neither. Me neither.
I just know that initially I thought, statistically speaking, he more than likely did. Then the DNA situation happened. And all I want is not just like, believe me because I'm telling you. Like, tell me it's a person who, whatever. Tell me something else. But what they said was that it just matched at these particular loci, right?
Right.
Except that's exactly the standard that the people who make these standards, they have put it at those loci because it is identifying, right?
Right.
And so how can you now tell me that it doesn't matter that it matched? Because what does that do to the DNA testing that they went off the matching of the loci just like this, that they're saying it doesn't matter?
I know, because and the weird thing is you're going to have a prosecution trying to make that argument. And like they can only go so far with their expert. Otherwise, like you said, they're risking damaging other convictions or potentially admitting that like their standards suck. Like they have to decide like which way they want to go with that.
Well, right. And it's not a good idea. This undermines, it's not surprising to me, but it undermines a whole lot of things. You know, I've been saying for years now, the avalanche of DNA, we are like in the middle of it, but I've wondered what the downfall was going to be, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like right now with Barry Morphew's case, they need to be very careful about confirmation bias because statistically it was probably him, but like that's not reality necessarily. And they've already messed this up once, right?
Well, I mean, if they're going to contradict themselves, they're creating their own reasonable doubt. If they're going to contradict like the science they've been using for years, they're creating a much bigger problem than just reasonable doubt for Barry Morphew.
I think that's where it bothers me more is like, wait, what are you doing here? Right. And see, I have absolutely no educational background in like genetic genealogy, but I happen to sort of inherently understand some things about DNA. Perhaps if I was an expert, I would see what's happening here. But the other stuff I've been correct on, it's not like this isn't adding up correctly like I would expect it to. When I read the indictment after it was announced that he was arrested, I guess he's been arrested, right?
Yeah, he was. Last I checked, he was in jail down in Arizona, and he was going to be headed for an extradition hearing, which basically so they can bring him from Arizona back to Colorado. And there was a bond set, but I think it was like maybe multiple millions of dollars.
It's $3 million is what I saw, I think. But anyway, when I saw that he was arrested, I was not anxious, but I was interested in reading the probable cause affidavit. But this is a grand jury indictment, so that means the case went before the grand jury, right?
Right, and this is what is kind of put together as the summary of that. There's more to it than what we're talking about.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But this is sort of the summary, and perhaps that'll be answered in more detail, or maybe I'm just not understanding the way what they meant to convey or whatever. But I was surprised that there wasn't more.
Yeah, if this is going to like center on telematics that they're contradicting themselves on and they don't tie up that DNA. And there's I say that like that guy, whoever the DNA is from CODIS, has to be deceased prior to her disappearance, but that's not the only reason. I mean, I could see him being in jail. I could see him being infirm. Like, there's a number of things that would make me go, okay, like, I understand where you're going, but like contradicting their own science and saying it no longer matches is kind of weird. So I hope it's not that. Or like I could, like, there's a lot of things that like I could see a prosecution's office deciding like this is enough. And it could be like, this was the guy who like did the oil changes on her car, and they know that, and he was here on this day. But like some of that stuff is still going to be on the edge of reasonable doubt from what we see right now.
I agree. This is really going to be an interesting. I'd like to know when he put her body there.
Yeah, that's the other thing I want to see is kind of a timeline of what they suspected, how the telematics, maybe like if they came back and said, look, the telematics from that first day didn't change. They're still the same thing, but he contradicts us because we think he moved the body at this time and did this. And I could see that being something I got behind as like making sense for a prosecution.
But my understanding was, okay, so in the grand jury indictment, the one that just came out, it says that the area wasn't consistent with the body having been dumped there right after she was killed and decomposing there.
Right.
Okay, but he was being watched like a hawk.
Right. That's the other thing they're going to have to explain here is like he's under all this surveillance and all this suspicion. Like, was it a lack of resources that they're going to blame this on? Or like, how is this going to go that we end up like believing the prosecution's story, that's really what they're doing with the jury. They're trying to convince the jury of a story that the prosecutor's going to tell them about how all of this works. But they've already said so many things that like, if you and I are talking about it, that means it's out there. Like it's out there in terms of the lawsuits, in terms of all the different motions. And like the prosecution at some point came forward and said, without these experts, like we can't try this case because we don't have enough. And now they're saying they do, which is going to be interesting.
It is going to be interesting.
And expensive. I know that's apparently a thing jurors look at. Just so you guys are aware out there in jury land, it's expensive on both sides.
It is, but that's also not to be taken into consideration.
Correct. That is not something you take into the jury room with you in case you're wondering. The expense of the trial is irrelevant.
It is absolutely irrelevant.
So I knew this was happening, and you and I are kind of in this phase of True Crime XS where we're like, we record in batches. You and I are prepping to do holiday stuff, even though it's only June. Like we're prepping our holiday stuff to decide like how we're going to do that. So I put this on as what I knew was going to be a long piece of true crime news. And I don't have a case today because I have another piece of true crime news. And I don't have a ton on Barry Morphew yet. What you just heard is my opinion so far. But
that's all I have too. That was just my opinion.
So I thought I would switch over and just do this other piece of true crime news because this popped up in the middle of something I'm doing where when we do these like longer series, there's a longer series that I'm doing or working on. And there was a piece of news in the middle of it that kind of floored me. So I was like, you know what? We can do Barry Morphew this week. That's relevant. And then I want to talk about this other case. Had you ever heard of like what was happening surrounding this Broward County thing?
I have not before this.
Yeah. So we've tinkered in Florida, South Florida specifically over the years. Like there's been a couple of longer series we've done where I get fascinated by like multiple unsolved homicides. I think people know that like everything we present, we have some kind of question over, just like we were talking about with Barry's case. The murder of Suzanne Morphew causes a lot of questions for me. And it's an interesting situation. I don't know if it's all that unique. If it's just the husband killed the wife, it's not that interesting in the long run. It's just sort of the legal process that was interesting. But this one, like, everything from like how the crime went down to like how they're like disclosing it to us is both interesting and weird. These are essentially unsolved murders from 1975, which feels like forever, right? Like it's 50 years ago now.
I was not alive in 1975. So.
I was not either.
I would say, yeah, it was a long time ago. 50 years. Yeah, it is 50. No.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's 50 years.
Okay, 50 years ago.
It's
Yeah.
2025 now. Would have been, yeah. So this article got published in May. And like I said, initially I thought it was going to be part of another series that I'm working on, but it's not. And they like, it just like the time and place is like really specific. And they have now kind of clarified that it's not going to be related to the other thing I'm talking about. But 6 to Know, NBC Miami, they had an article that popped out on May 22nd. It's just by the staff. Like it's basically what went on the air. It's basically what went on the air. And they put this all together. But I wanted to talk about it briefly. The title says, Detectives Solve Brutal 1975 Cold Case Murder of 2 Teens in Broward. And that's according to the Broward County Sheriff. So for those of you who don't know, South Florida has like crazy amount of unsolved crimes. Some of them are serial crimes. I get really interesting in potential serial crimes where like the motives or the MOs are like shared. This is the murder of 2 teenage girls. And this is how the article lays it out. Nearly 50 years after 2 teen girls were brutally murdered in Broward, detectives believe they've solved the horrific cold case with the help of DNA technology. Broward Sheriff Gregory Toney, he gave an update on Thursday on the investigation into the deaths of Barbara Schreiber and Darlene Zetterauer, saying detectives now believe they know who killed them. They were 14-year-old girls, like for the audience at home. They had been sitting on a bench in June 1975 when a white van pulled up. The girls, they were on summer break. They were getting ready for high school. They had been known to be frequent hitchhikers, and they apparently get willingly into this van, according to eyewitness accounts. They're never seen alive again. The following day, their bodies are discovered by a family that's fishing off of Interstate 75 down in the Everglades in an area that's known as Andytown. They had both been sexually assaulted and shot to death, and their bodies were left on the side of a dirt road. So this is a double murder of 2 14-year-old children. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
It's been cold for 50 years. Now, behind the scenes, investigators did announce in 2023 that they felt like they had identified a suspect. So they're working on it to a degree. And that suspect is the guy that at some point we'll talk about because he's tangential to other things. He is a serial predator named Robert Clark Keebler. He dies in 2019, and he had a pretty long criminal history. His mugshots are crazy. He looks a lot like Charles Manson. And he had a serious armed robbery, sexual assault, aggravated assault with intent to kill. Like he had a real rap sheet. And not a lot of people cover him. He's been a suspect in a lot of things. But ultimately, they tell the world that he's the one who did this. But what's interesting about this is they announced in May of this year that he had an accomplice. So whether that accomplice is completely complicit and they're on the same level or he dragged into this, they named a second man. And that's what makes it so interesting to me.
It is very interesting.
There were initial reports that there were potentially 2 men inside the white van. So it's not like a complete shock. But they name a guy named Lawrence Stein. Now, if you go on the internet, you can find mugshots of these guys as late as 2005. And like when they're younger, I said he looked like Charles Manson. Lawrence Stein could not be more different looking than Robert Clark Keebler. They
are exact opposites, yes.
Yeah, like, so in Robert Clark Keebler's mugshots over the years, and there are a few newspaper accounts about him. If you're into newspapers.com, he's in there. He like has this crazy unkempt beard and this wild hair, and like he kind of looks like Henry Lee Lucas a little bit in some of the early mugshots, and it always looks like his right eye is like on the verge of closing.
Yeah.
But then Lawrence Stein is he kind of looks military. He's got really short hair that looks like it's just growing out. He does have sideburns in some of the pictures I've seen of him. He's got piercing blue eyes. So I'm not exactly sure who's in charge here, but in the later mugshots that you can find of the two of them, I know I saw one of Lawrence Stein in 2005, and I saw one of Robert Clark Keebler in like 2014. They look crazy. They both have huge beards. Stein has these massive glasses. He kind of looks like Jeffrey Dahmer at that point, but he's got the beard covering his face. Long, wild, unkempt hair. And like they're saying that like not only did Robert Clark Keebler participate in the murder and sexual assault of these two young girls, these 14-year-old girls, they're saying Lawrence Stein was with him. Now, he died in 2005. He also had a lengthy criminal history. According to the detectives at Broward Sheriff's Office, they both had multiple sexual assaults that they've been charged in, and they were able to track the sexual assaults all the way back to 1972. They took place in Florida, California, and Arizona. I can only imagine some of that is CODIS hits. The sheriff came out to say that they were commending the work of the BSO cold case homicide and crime lab units that refused to let these two deaths, meaning Barbara and Darlene's death, go unanswered. And he said, sadly, these two men will never be tried in a court of law, but this outcome should reassure the community that the sheriff's office is committed to pursuing justice, no matter how long it takes. According to the detectives who also spoke in on this, DNA testing identified Keebler and Stein from samples taken from the girls' clothing. The evidence had been processed multiple times, but there was a new technique they used that revealed a complete DNA profile for one of the men, a partial for the other. And in addition, the detective that's part of this cold case unit, Giannino, he said detectives were able to find a witness who had never been interviewed, who said they saw the two men in the van. They saw the two teens get into the van. Now, they were also able to track down when Robert Clark Keebler came to South Florida from California. And they did find out he was driving a white van, which is the same vehicle he was driving when he was arrested 7 days after the teens were murdered. He was arrested in a road rage incident. So they know the van came into South Florida and was around a week after the two girls were murdered. Barbara's younger sister spoke out. Her name is Kimberly. She spoke at the news conference in May. She thanked them for seeing the case through. She would have been 5 years old when her older sister was murdered at 14. She says she does remember vaguely like her sister, and she said we had good times and fun times. And she said, I do imagine how my siblings would feel if they were here to know that this team had done everything to find the people that did this tremendous, horrible thing to our family. And Kimberly said that it devastated and destroyed her family. She said it did not break them, but it broke their hearts. There have been rumors that the murders of Barbara and Darlene were related to a couple of other different series of murders in the area. But the detectives said they don't believe that these two killers, Robert Clark Keebler and Lawrence Stein, are linked to those other killings. And he said they're still hunting the people responsible in those cases. And he did point out, like I said, he pointed out in the press conference that there is a much different MO in those cases. And at some point, we'll get back around to that. But I wanted to bring this up today as sort of a second piece of true crime news and a really interesting case. Like, it's interesting to me, the age on it, 50 years, that the evidence was intact enough that they were able to do DNA work, it looks like. It is sad that like both of these guys are deceased and won't see justice, but it is interesting to know who did it. I guess that's one piece of the puzzle, right?
I think so. I think it's really interesting, but now I'm questioning everything over the DNA situation.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions of that. And like one of the other things that this has caused me to have, I guess pause is the right word, over, is I don't know how many cases you and I have covered in the last 3 years where suddenly there's an accomplice. And we had learned over our own research and honestly from the behavioral sciences and behavioral analysis units over the years that it's typically a lone male committing these types of violent rape homicides. And I would say that perception has been shattered.
Shattered, or at least, well, I was going to say, at least if I will say it's more likely to be a singular male committing the homicide. I also think a lot of times, and because both of these guys are dead, like, we have no idea all the ins and outs of everything, right? But a lot of times somebody that's an accomplice is less of an accomplice than, in my mind, what I thought of when I came up with that idea, right? Like, when I was like, oh, it's mostly a single male dude. And I don't mean single by like not married. I mean like not a pair of males. Yeah.
I'm torn on how I feel about that now, but yeah, I agree with you. It's more likely than not to be sort of a lone wolf engaging in this type of predatory behavior.
It's almost always like one of the two wouldn't be in the situation if it weren't for the other.
And that's where I was headed, was like, not exactly that thought, but the thought of, how did these people find each other?
Exactly. And that is why my thought is it's not even possible for two people like-minded in murder to find one another, right?
Right. And at least to the point that, like, the crimes are unsolved. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I think, like, when people say things like, oh, there's no more serial killers, and they, like, sort of list off, like, what would be the Hall of Fame, or I guess the Mount Rushmore of serial killers. There's nobody like Gain or Bundy or Dahmer or Ramirez or whoever. They throw names out there. I think I think we've passed a time where, like, that's going to happen with those people becoming as prolific as they once might have. But I think we're also past the time where, like, two people could do this kind of crime, where it's like they're raping two 14-year-old girls and shooting them and leaving them on a dirt road, and, like, keep doing crimes like that and get away with it.
I agree. I don't think it's, unless
somebody's got a phone on now or something.
Yeah, exactly. And there's videos everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's getting a lot harder. I would say this kind of crime is a lot harder. I still think, like, stealthy serial killers are operating, maybe not in the frequency as before, but I do think some of them are getting away with it in a way that, like, we don't know yet. Like, you talk all the time about, like, what do we not know about DNA and whatnot. I always am kind of consistently thinking, like, what is wrong about profiling that at some point we're going to find out about it, and, like, it's no longer going to be, we know a lot less than we think we do. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Exactly.
But I wanted to bring that case up. I don't have a lot on this one right now. I just thought it was fascinating. It's 50 years old. It's a June 1975 case. They've now solved it. Unfortunately, one of the men was deceased in 2005. We knew the other one was deceased in 2019 when they made the announcement in 2023. I was interested in it then, like, a little bit, like, looking into more of Robert Clark Keebler. But now that they've thrown Lawrence Stein in the mix, I'm really interested in these two guys. And, like, I want to pull their criminal histories and, like, look through, like, what were they doing? And I do wonder, when cases like this happen, like, what do we not know about these two guys?
Exactly.
Were they killing witnesses, or were they just rapists that went too far? Did one of the girls say, I'm going to tell on you? Or, like what happens that, like, we get this crime? So now that I've, like, told the True Crime News part of it, yeah, at some point I may come back around to this story and try and cover it if I can figure out a unique angle to answer some of my own questions. Did you have anything else about Barry Morphew or this one?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, we'll pick up next week.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrattiCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.